billion. People pay like $25,000 a week. Good afternoon. My name is Doug Holder, and I'm with my guest, Kathleen Aguero. She is an accomplished poet. Welcome here, Kathleen.
You. Glad to be here.
Kathleen Aguero is a professor at the M.F.A. program at Pine Manor College, and she's also the number of poetry collections. Most recently, After That, and we'll be discussing that on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer. Okay. After That, deals with your mother's Alzheimer and Nancy Drew of all things, and the sort of severe contrasts. I mean, why did you? I mean, thematically. Yeah. I mean, how did you come about that?
I think that thematically, the Nancy Drew poems echo the ones in the first half, because the Nancy Drew poems imagine Nancy Drew as older, and some of them are about my mother.
For some of our younger viewers, who is Nancy Drew?
Oh, Nancy Drew. She was the girl sleuth of my childhood. She had her own car. She solved all kinds of mysteries. She got in and out of trouble. So she was...
And that was a big deal,
it was a big deal.
Because girls didn't do much.
No, absolutely not. Her mother, she didn't have a mother. Her mother was dead. And her father was a lawyer who was conveniently absent most of the time. So she pretty much could do what she wants. So she was a very exciting figure to all of us. But I began to wonder, where was she when I really needed her? In middle age, and so then I began to imagine her aging, and I also sort of imagined, I was able to write about some of the things that had to do with my mother through Nancy Drew, because it gave me just enough distance to do that. So I sort of felt like the two themes sort of echoed each other in a funny way.
Okay. All right. I don't think anyone's done anything quite like that.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know.
That's good, I guess, right? Now, your mother's passed away.
Yes, she has,
she had Alzheimer's, and I'm sure in the back of your mind you worry about, especially, getting into, there's a genetic component to it.
Right.
I know my father had dementia, and every time I forget something, I have a heart attack, right? So especially for a poet who ideally has to have the heightened senses and things like that for all that's around him, and that must be very frightening.
It is really frightening because I think my mother's father might have had Alzheimer's. They called it hardening of the arteries.
Right.
But, and then at least one of her sisters had Alzheimer's. So, and I thought of getting tested or even going into one of those studies, figuring, well, at least something good might come of it. But yeah, it is kind of on my mind.
I thought of that, but then it would screw me up for the remaining years. So I figure ignorance is bliss.
No,
right?
I'm the opposite. For me, like, the more I know, the better I feel. And I also think it's a very difficult disease for families. And that...
well, you have children, so it's a different deal.
But I mean, even for my husband,
I
mean, and I don't know, I think if you go into one of those studies, they don't necessarily tell you, they want you to know. That's my drawback, I want to know. But I think it helps prepare the family as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as a poet, do you find that?
Oh yeah, losing your words. I mean, luckily I have a lot of friends my own age, and we all are struggling for to remember things.
Right.
So I feel a little comforted by that. But yeah, there have some occasions.
But of course, you forget where you parked the car in the parking lot.
Oh
right?
yeah, luckily now they have those beepers,
I got a blue Honda, so every car looks like it.
I had a blue Subaru once. Everyone in Cambridge had a blue Subaru Forester.
So anyway. We were going to go into Nancy Drew, which was a previous book, but also in your book after that. But she was a sort of liberating figure for you, right?
Right, a real role model.
Right. I remember interviewing Lois Ames. She's much older, but she said, basically for women it was a revolutionary act to be outside of the kitchen. Yeah. And so Nancy Drew sort of. Was the positive role model for her.
She was, although one of the very interesting things is I reread her books, and I was reading Nancy Drew because I was teaching a class in children's literature. And if you go back to the really original ones, which can be difficult to find, there's a lot of class bias and bias about ethnicities, which I certainly didn't notice when I was a child. But it kind of leaps out at you if you reread them as an adult.
So is Shakespeare, right?
Right,
Yeah.
but these are more blatant.
Right.
All the crooks are swarthy, and all the victims are like impoverished gentility. You know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, all right. Now, the book was published by our mutual friend and wonderful Cervena Barva Press. Hello, Gloria, if you're looking out there.
Yeah, Gloria.
How was it working with the press? And Gloria's an old friend of yours.
Yeah. Well, are we old friends? I mean, I met her, I think, through readings and things like that. I probably have known her, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so. Yeah, yeah.
Tell me, how was that working with the small press?
Oh, she was fabulous. I mean, it's print on demand, which I think is great. It's
because you don't waste all those.
It's keeping small presses alive.
Right.
And it got somebody picked it up and reviewed it, and was it somebody?
Yeah, Michael Todd Stephan.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are always books if I need them, and yeah, I think Cervena Barva is a wonderful press.
Right,
And she publishes international writers as well, and I've always been with small presses. Even my first book was with Alice James, but that was 1976. It was.
They started out as like sort of small communal.
They were cooperative.
And now they're in Maine, right?
Right. They've become more of almost a university press, but it was a small cooperative press with a focus on publishing women. And
was it? Because I know Ron Schreiber was published.
Well, there were two. There was Ron Schreiber and Lee Rudolph, the two founding members, but the focus was on publishing women.
Oh, okay.
Until it went to Farmington, I think they kind of dropped that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if they've reinstated it. So I've always had small presses, and I always, I appreciate them. And, I have friends.
And poetry is really dependent on small presses because a lot of big. And I was speaking to, Mark Pollack, of course, and he said, well, Sherman Alexie still goes with his poetry through the small press because they give it more publicity, and the big ones just put it out, and that's about it.
Right, and big publishers are not going to make any money on it, and that's what they're about. And I've had friends who've published with big publishers. They're no better getting the books to the readings or, getting you readings. I think it's just the nature of poetry.
Okay. Now, I was reading an interview, not an interview, but a review where the reviewer pointed out that you don't have wasted words, and that's important. And so how do you sort of trim the fat in your poem, so to speak?
Well, you know what? I have a workshop group that I have been part of forever, and they are invaluable. I mean,
any poets you can mention in that group? Or?
Sure. Erica Funkhauser, Celia Gilbert,
Celia,
Suzanne
I've interviewed her.
Helena Minton, Christopher Corkery. So and people I've known for a long time.
Okay.
And so they don't need to be, we're never cruel to one another, but we don't need to pussyfoot around.
Right.
So I think that's invaluable, having other people read your work.
Okay. Other people read your work. Okay. Now, you live with the wife, and he's the husband. Richard Hoffman is a very accomplished writer too, and he's a poet and a memoirist. So, is there a competitive nature to you both? How does it work? I mean,
Well, sometimes sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. When we first got married, I had published several books, and he hadn't published anything, and I think that was very difficult for him. And then suddenly he began publishing, and it took me 10 years to get my book Daughter of published, so that was more difficult for me. But I think when our kids were young, it wasn't competition, but the struggle was around both of us having time to write.
Okay.
Because in fact, we've always been supportive of and interested in one another's work, and we sometimes act as first readers for one another. So you're right, it's complicated, but I think on the whole it's been really beneficial.
Do you feed off each other's work in any sense?
That's a good question. I think we used to more, not off what one another had written, but off being writers together. And now I think as we've gotten older, we're sort of working more independently. And Richard's been writing, working on this memoir for a long time, and I've written and published some essays, but I'm not really a prose writer.
Do you have separate studies?
Yeah, we definitely have separate studies. I'm like, Richard can write with the door open. I have to be totally enclosed. I want the door closed, nobody around, nobody looking at me.
Yeah, I like writing in cafes for some reason. I don't know why.
Some people can do, there's a certain anonymity about being in a public place.
I like that. Now, you teach at the M.F.A. program at Pine Manor, as we discussed, and you're involved with the Solstice Magazine.
Yes, I'm a consulting poetry editor for
Consultant
Solstice.
poetry editor. Discuss your role both in the M.F.A. program and the magazine briefly. I mean.
Well, the low-residency M.F.A. programs, I think, are wonderful. I went to a resident program at Boston University, and it was really good, but I don't think I got the kind of attention that students in the low-residency program get, where you're sort of exchanging your packets with your mentor. And so, you know, it's a very stimulating and intense environment for the 10 days that everybody's on campus, because you not only have these 3-hour workshops with students, but you're going to readings by your colleagues every night. People are giving seminars and lectures that you attend, and so I feel really immersed in writing in a wonderful way. And then during the packet exchange, you're also able to build a very intense relationship with the students that you're working with. So I think, and Meg and Tanya are fabulous. They have managed to establish a very supportive, rather competitive atmosphere.
Okay.
The Solstice Literary Journal, I've sort of taken a kind of, I'm the consulting editor, not the poetry editor anymore, but that gives me the freedom to sort of seek out new people and invite them to subscribe. And I think Lee Hope she's the editor and founded it, an amazing support to writers. She really is a very generous person. So it's sort of exciting to be part of that endeavor of finding new people and putting them in print and supporting them.
Great. You published it's one of our. We published a book of poems by Mike Amato. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And do you have any recollections?
Well, I remember him because I've been to readings of him, and he wasn't in the M.F.A. program, but when we used to have a summer conference, he went. I just remember him as being this amazingly sort of ebullient and generous spirit, sort of despite, you know, his hardship and illness. He was just sort of always very present to himself and other people. I didn't know him particularly well. I just encountered him, I would say, in those situations.
Okay, well we've covered a lot of ground in a small time, so you can read from your work now, and we have a lot more time than we anticipated, so choose whatever you want.
All right.
Where can we buy this book, if we wanted to?
Well, it's at Porter Square Books.
Okay.
You can get it online from the publisher, Tiger Bark Books, and I think there's some copies from Amazon, although I'd say go to Porter Square first, support your local bookstores, or support your small publisher and go to Tiger Bark.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and just read into the camera as we discussed?
Sure. So, you know, as you said, Doug, a lot of these poems have to do with my my mother's Alzheimer's. So I'd like to set that part of the book up by reading this poem, which is almost taken verbatim from.
And this is from after that, poems
from after that,
by
yeah.
Kathleen
Hold up the cover. The cover is by an artist friend of mine, so I'm really in love with the cover. She generously donated the artwork. Where do you live? Do you have any children? This is my mother speaking to me in a room where her grandchildren's photos cover the walls. You look tall, she says, and your hair is so curly. You still don't comb it. I know who you are. I just wasn't expecting someone so young. Leftovers. When she chews the napkin, mistaking it for an hors d'oeuvre, when she eats the tea bag that rests by the side of her cup, I want to be the one to gently take the plate away, to give her something tastier for lunch. The General, we called her, when she told us what time we'd leave for the beach, challenged the nuns who bullied her children, sold the house, packed the furniture, chose the paint for new walls, drove a rental car through the mountains of France. No, Ruthie, put this end to your ear, I hear my father tell her when I phone to say flights are canceled because of snow, so I won't be home for Christmas. It's a good thing you can't come, she tells me. It's terrible here. I've never seen anything like it. Inside our house, strangers are walking around in their coats. That night, after dinner, my father will hand my mother plastic plates to dry as he wraps up the leftovers, puts the carving knife in its case. Over and over, she'll wipe the same dish.
Did your mother Did you ever read these poems? I mean, she might not have comprehended them.
No, I mean, I don't think I'm not sure whether to be honest, I don't remember if I wrote any of them when she was actually alive.
Why do you think that is?
I think I might have written I can't remember when the Nancy Drew book came out and when she died. I might have written a few in there. You know, I was just so much in the middle of it. It was hard to have any distance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the first poems I wrote about her might have been the Nancy Drew ones because that fictional structure gave me the distance that I needed. And actually, those were difficult years. I had a friend, a really close friend, who became clinically depressed and committed suicide. I had a colleague who died unexpectedly. So, it just felt like a lot was happening at once. In fact, this next poem, partly it's about my mother, but partly it's about my friend who became depressed. And it's sort of like, when you work with people in McLean's, you wonder, what happens? We think we have these personalities and these characters, and then something in our wiring or chemistry goes awry, and it's like a completely different person that's hard to understand. After that, she wouldn't leave the house, or she'd be gone for weeks and return smelling of cigarettes and bleach. She'd say what anyone would, but like thunder in winter, it didn't sound quite right. When she thought we weren't looking, she tied knots in her hair. She wouldn't eat anything white, hid money in the refrigerator, wore 5 pairs of underpants at once, cringed at butterflies. She covered her ears when she talked and was afraid of the telephone. She threw away her plants, collected fruit pits. She stopped biting her fingernails after that, but she wouldn't let anyone cut them either. She wore a hat, but never a jacket. Her dog wouldn't go near her. She wouldn't answer the doorbell, but she never closed the door. She refused to go near the windows. After that, she never drank tea. She hissed at her dead mother standing in the doorway. She ripped her good dress into pieces and cut her father's photograph in half. We didn't know how to think about her after that. Maybe I'll read some of the Nancy Drew poems to answer your question, to show you what I think some of the connections are between them. So this one is kind of a found poem, composed of mostly of the titles of Nancy Drew books. And I guess, it's interesting. So she was a sleuth, and I was thinking about what's going on with my mother, what happened to my friend. Mystery of the Girl Sleuth, for Nancy Drew on her 50th birthday. What secret does the old clock hold now? Where does the hidden staircase lead? It's time to mount the 99 steps, to accept the secret in the attic. The clues have been there all along, in your diary, in the old album, in the velvet mask you struggle to remove. Answer the invitation to the Golden Pavilion. Read the mysterious letter of your own blood. Lean against the crumbling wall and listen to the mystery of the tolling bell. Although you wish you'd never started on this quest for the missing map, you must follow it to the message in the hollow oak, across the haunted bridge to face the wooden lady and the statue whispering what you do not want to hear.
So Nancy Drew at 50, I mean, how is she different from the girl, do you think?
Well, I think she's sort of sick of her life, her perfect life, and trying to figure out, what's next for her.
Okay.
Well, here's a poem about, the thing about Nancy Drew is she could change the tires on her roadster. She could get in and out of every jam. She was always rescuing people. And,
Did she have any significant others?
She had a boyfriend, Ned, who was a high school football star, but he was pretty much a patsy. He just came when she needed him, kind of thing.
So he was just an appendage.
Yes, just an appendage.
So he was
exactly.
Almost female.
Well,
I mean, in those days.
In those days, yeah. She definitely was the boss.
Yeah.
And if you know competent people, it can be a curse. If you're competent at work, the more you can do, the more people ask you to do.
Yeah, right. The more expect.
Right. So in this poem, I sort of imagine Nancy sort of being tired of being the competent one. Her competence. Nancy's sick of being competent, but can't quit because someone else made her up and she still earns them money. 100 crime victims whimper like strays in a pound. Mystery after mystery she can solve in white gloves and a hat. That one sold well, so they write her into another. Just about now she'd like to change plots, but she can't figure out how to trade in her roadster for a bucking bronco or a truck with a rifle underneath the front seat. She'd like to strip off her clothes as slowly as daybreak in winter and tease some crook into her bed. She has transferable skills, but doesn't know how to describe them. Sometimes she thinks she'd rather serve coffee in the local diner, slap a wet rag across tables so it smudges more than it wipes off. She'd listen to people's troubles without having to solve them. Maybe things would be different in a bigger city, Paris or Rio, or in a farm so remote only she ate the vegetables grown there. Or, just once, could she be the one to get rescued?
So, I mean, in a way, I mean, it's a great mystery about your, Alzheimer's and your mother and just losing this personality, and where is it? So, I mean, I don't know if I'm stretching it, but Nancy Drew is an investigative detective. I mean, in some ways that, she could have an answer, right?
Right. I guess I was hoping she might, or to problems about, my kids were, they were older teenagers, and things going on with my kids. I mean, she knew how to do everything, but she had no advice on child rearing or managing teenagers. So, I was thinking I could use an older Nancy Drew to work on some of these
Miss
issues.
Maple, Marple.
Right, but I don't think she was a family woman either.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
This poem is based on a cover of a Nancy Drew book, but it also, you'll see my mother, there's echoes of my mother in here. It's called Larkspur Lane, after the title of one of Nancy Drew books.
Not Bagels and Lox.
No. A gray-haired woman in a wheelchair is locked up on the grounds of a mansion against her will, guarded by an imposter nurse until she signed over her property to the crooked lawyer running towards her, arm raised, face contorted, shouting, "Get away from that fence." The elderly woman, finger to lips, catches Nancy's eye and points at him, as if our younger selves could free our older selves through stealth. When I was Nancy's age, I could imagine my efficient mother in a nursing home looking for a way out, whispering that I should leave while I could, or telling me I'd burn in hell for what I'd done to her. She was clever. She found the wooden gate where they put the garbage out. She pulled, but it was locked. She waited, but no one came. So she joined the other walkers round and round the halls, out one door, in the other, shuffling in untied shoes or stepping briskly, imaginary briefcases or shopping baskets under their arms as they made their way through crowded streets from the train station to the office. They tried all the passwords. Call me a cab. I have to pick up the kids. Is it time to leave for the ball game yet? One man nearly broke out, but ever polite, he paused to let me pass, and the nurse came running, pulling him back, scolding, "Get away from the door." "Don't worry," the receptionist told me. "If they get as far as the lobby, an alarm rings." To sneak in and out of Larkspur Lane, you'd have to be a sleuth. But now I've got the password. My mother gave it to me. Lean close. I'll tell you what it is.
So would you describe your the Nancy Drew sort of more prose poetry than, or what would you say?
I don't think it's prose poetry. It's not set up as prose poetry, but it's definitely narrative.
Narrative poetry.
Yeah, definitely narrative poetry.
Okay.
In fact, I think I write a lot of narrative, poetry.
Okay. And what distinguishes poetry from prose is line breaks, right?
Right. Yeah.
How do you, for people who are interested in the poetic process, I mean, how do you
work on the line breaks?
Yeah. I know you have the workshop, but I mean,
I really try to. I'm interested in lines that do two things. One, break in a way that emphasizes what you want. You want it to flow, you want it to be enjambed, and also so that individual lines have some significant read by themselves, and that if you continue, it might undermine or double up the meaning. So I try to do that.
There's a lot of instinct
A lot of it is instinct, but when I go over again, you know,
Yeah.
I try to work on that. Generally, although I've seen a lot of poets do it, I generally do not end on weaker words like articles or prepositions, you know, and I was really interested to see, I think I saw some poems of Molly Peacock's, and she's a poet I admire a great deal that do that. So obviously there's no, like, don't do that rules, but, you know, my instinct is to try to end on a stronger word, yeah.
By the way, I didn't ask you, where did you study?
I studied at Boston University. I was there a long time ago. I studied with George Starbuck, Anne Sexton, and John Malcolm Brennan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about Sexton, your impressions. I've asked a lot of people about that.
Yeah, everybody wants to know about Anne Sexton.
I know Kathleen Spivak,
yeah.
Lois Ames, who I've interviewed, right?
Yeah, well, when I was in Anne's class, Lois Ames came to every class with a tape recorder to tape record the classes for the biography.
She's ill right now, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Anne, the year I had Anne, she was still...
This is in the 70s, right?
Yeah, so I graduated from BU in 1973. It was the next year that she took her own life.
Right.
So towards that end of the year, the second semester, she definitely seemed a little manic. But she was a very warm and generous teacher, incredibly warm and generous and really fun. And yeah, so she and very charismatic. So there were a lot of people taking the class who weren't in the graduate program.
Were you in the graduate program?
Oh yeah, that's where I got my master's. It was an MA in creative writing then, and I think the people who studied with her because of her personality formed a kind of group of our own. I mean, I don't mean that to say excluded other people, but we bonded, I think, because of her warmth and generosity.
Lloyd Schwartz.
Lloyd wasn't in that. Who was in that class? Celia Gilbert, Suzanne Berger, Eric Edwards. I can't remember. One called Arlene Stone. I can't remember everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so she definitely had an influence on your...
Oh, I think so. I went there because she was teaching. I was accepted into other places, but I wanted to study with her.
Okay.
And that's why I went to BU.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
I was lucky.
Yeah, you're very lucky. Yeah.
I was. Should I read another poem?
Yes, go ahead.
All right.
Yes.
We have. Maybe I'll just read a poem. I teach, and I was teaching at Chautauqua, and used an exercise from Neruda's Book of Questions, where he asks these kind of crazy questions. But I had the students write questions and then swap them and answer them. And I always do the writing exercise. So I'll read one or two, depending on our time, from this sequence.
Well, for our sake of our tape, we'll let you go over it slightly bit. Yeah.
So these are poems, believe it or not, about fastenings, things you fasten your clothes with. Each time the buttonhole opens its mouth, a backdoor history escapes. Stop, it says. Hide, it says. I'll hold you. Tidy, whipstitch, end. I was wedded to mother of pearl. I wake, then I sleep. I wake, then I sleep, chants the buttonhole. We also serve who hold things together, who cover them up. I've got